Welcome, everyone. Bienvenue, tout le monde. Bonjour. Hi, everyone. Bonjour, tout le monde. Bienvenue. Welcome to today's webinar, Bringing Community Voices into Policy Making. We're just going to give people a bit more time to join the call. And before we begin, I'd like to note that today's webinar will be broadcast in both English and French using live translation. So in order to access the interpretation, please look to the bottom of your screen and click on the button that says Interpretation. It should look like a small globe. Please then choose your language of choice. And if you're joining by mobile phone, please click the three buttons on the right of your screen and click More. Then choose your language where it says Language Interpretation. Looks like we're getting more and more participants, people joining the call by the minute. So we'll just give a few more minutes to join before we get started. Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue. Welcome to our webinar on bringing community voices into policy making, organized by Farm Radio International. It's great to see so many people on the call, joining us from so many different corners of the world. Today, we'll be looking at how we and other organizations in civil society can best work with policymakers to ensure the voices of community are heard. And one last time, if you're just joining now, we'll be broadcasting this webinar in both French and English using live translation. In order to pick your language, please click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen where it says Interpretation, and then choose either English or French. This event is going to take about an hour, and if we have time, hopefully we'll have some time at the end, we'll host a question and answer section. We invite you to submit questions throughout the webinar. We'll have some staff answering those questions in the chat, and we will respond live at the end of the webinar if there's time. You can also do this, as I said, in the chat or by using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll also be recording today's webinar, so you'll be able to find it on our YouTube page in the near future. And it looks like we've got a good group here in the call, so I think with all that, we're going to get going. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is John McGill. I'm a radio and film producer based in Toronto, Canada. For the last decade, I worked for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation and their flagship current affairs radio program, As It Happens. Today, though, I'm reaching you from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, where I've had the privilege of volunteering with Farm Radio International as a documentary advisor for the last 6 months. I'm delighted to be your moderator and host for today's webinar. To get this conversation started, I'm pleased to introduce my colleague, Charles Kachuta. Charles is a project delivery lead at Farm Radio International. He has over 20 years experience in international development, specifically project management in both stable and conflict contexts. His current project focuses on nature-based solutions for climate change adaptation in 6 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, involving community adaptation and policy processes. Charles, over to you.
Thank you so much, John. I'm just gonna ask for a few seconds to share my screen. So thank you so much, John, once again. So for those who don't know, Farm Radio International is a leading communication for development organization. We have our head office in Ottawa in Canada, and we have offices in several countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And our aim is to make radio in combination with ICTs a powerful force for good in rural Africa, one that shares knowledge, amplifies voices, and supports positive change. So that's what Farm Radio is about. And for today's webinar, this webinar is located in a project that we call On Air for Gender Inclusive Nature-Based Solutions Project. And this project is funded by the government of Canada, by Global Affairs Canada, as part of the Partnering for Climate funding. And the project has, I would say, 3 to 4 key objectives. The first objective is actually to enhance rural community knowledge and action on climate change adaptation using nature-based solutions. The second is, which is really the subject of this webinar today, is really to increase responsiveness by policy and decision makers to the experiences, and the opinions, the needs of rural communities as concerns climate change adaptation. The third objective is really to kind of widespread awareness on the whole idea of nature-based solution across sub-Saharan Africa. What are the key practices around nature-based solutions that could be relevant for other countries across the subcontinent? And radio is helping to do this. So this is one of the objectives of this project. And the last but not the least is really to engage Canadian on on the use of nature-based solutions. The work that we're doing in Africa, how can we, bring the work up here in Canada to also engage, inform the Canadian audience so that they can also take actions as necessary. So kind of a graphical representation or summary of the project here is, we usually start the project with a community consultation, what we call an honor dialogue. But prior to an honor dialogue, we have what we call stakeholder meetings. It's located somewhere here. And then we do these consultations with community using a special radio format we call honor dialogues. You'll be hearing more about honor dialogues today. And so once we do that consultation, the outcome of the honor dialogues do inform policy and the policy dialogue processes, which is really what will be this webinar is all about. Outputs from the honor dialogues also go into what we call high impact radio programs. We know that there is nature-based solutions already in communities. How can we use radio documentaries to capture these solutions and then we spread it wide across other communities within countries? So this is what the high impact radio programming is all about. And the output from the uh, high impact radio programming is used to produce podcasts. I did mention that we want to engage Canadian audience more. So we are in partnership with Carleton University School of Journalism, where we send students to the project countries and they can write scripts and produce podcasts and bring it back home, to just share with Canadian audience what this Partnering for Climate Funding is doing in the context of our project about nature-based solutions. And also outputs from high impact radio series are also used to create the widespread awareness I did mention on nature-based solution practices across sub-Saharan Africa. And in fact, we are looking at 20 countries altogether, the 6 focus countries plus 14 other countries. And we are working with 200 stations and targeting 20 million. In fact, it would be interesting to hear that we're already over 40 million people reached in the context of this scale out across the region, the continent. So what is really On-Air Dialogues? On-Air Dialogue is an interactive radio approach that helps ignite compelling discussions that amplify a range of viewpoints, thoughts, and challenges heard by many individuals, the majority whom reside far from the world's major cities, basically in rural areas. And in an on-air dialogue, each episode in the on-air dialogue poses a series of questions to listeners using interactive voice response polling after a discussion hosted on air. So we have a discussion on air where an expert comes and talks on the topic of critical importance to communities, and then we launch a poll for the audience to respond to that poll. So why do we do this on-air dialogue? I think this is important for us to know to set the pace for this meeting is for this webinar is that, well, on-air dialogues is just one of our communication for development programming. And, communication for development puts communication at the center of development processes, leveraging the power of media to increase knowledge and facilitate change at scale. On-air dialogue specifically highlights the importance of listening to the primary stakeholders of our development work. And these are people, rural people, and they can inform programming and policy. That's why we do on-air dialogue, so that This outcome, the perspectives of communities can be reflected in policy and programming. So we've conducted honor dialogues in the context of this project in the past 3 to 4 years. And we will share with you now some really highlights, high-level results or findings that came out of this consultation. And just for the stats, the statistics is that for the 3 honor dialogues that we conducted, we had 57,000 calls that came into the honor dialogues, into the radio program. The first honor dialogue really looked at the impact of climate change. There we had 20,000 people, of course. Soil degradation and soil health was the second theme that we did address. And the third was about climate mobilities or climate-related migrations, if you wish. And we had those number of calls that came in for that. And in terms of the just kind of a distribution of the calls across the countries that were involved, the 6 focus countries, we see Zambia, Ethiopia, Burkina Faso tend to have had the highest respondents. Cote d'Ivoire is low. I guess Cote d'Ivoire would have been at the same level with Ghana and Uganda, just that we didn't include the results of the second online dialogue on soil degradation and soil health for Cote d'Ivoire because the questions were asked differently for country-specific needs, and we couldn't compile all of that together. So let's go into it now, and we look first. The first online dialogue was done in 2023 on the impact of climate change on communities. And what were we trying to get with this theme was, climate change has brought like different kind of changes in communities. But amongst all of these changes, what were the changes that had the most significant impact on communities from their own perspective? And this is what we got. The first one is that changes in rains and seasons, floods and droughts, food insecurity are having the biggest impact on communities. But mind you, they also mentioned that biodiversity and new pests, diseases, and weeds are also having big impact on communities. And you can really see that on this graph here. When we ask the question, what impact the changes in the amount of food available, there was about food security issues have on your community. We find the orange. Many people said it had a very big impact, and some said some impact. So you can see that the question of food insecurity, changes that happen in that area is having significant impact on communities. We also learned from communities that women are more greatly affected than men by climate change. And in fact, our work on documentaries has shown several cases of, and very, very severe cases of gender-based violence. Another point that emerged from these findings is that lack of knowledge, technical and financial resources are the most important limitations to community actions in response to climate change. So you can see about what we said about women being more greatly affected. Men and women in all the countries do agree that climate change is having a bigger negative effect on women than on men. So let's move on to the second theme that was on soil degradation and soil health. And the first thing that came out of this work was that what communities are telling us is that soil fertility and yields have been declining over the past decade. And you can see on the graph here, the green section of the bars shows that when we ask the question, what is the biggest change in soil in the last 10 years in your area? Many people said soils are less fertile, this one in green, but we know that some countries are also saying in yellow here that soils are more fertile. Like in Ethiopia, it's kind of a mixed result there also to an extent in all the other countries. So that is the situation in terms of soil changes over the past 10 years. And we further asked, what is the biggest impact of this change that is happening over the course of 10 years? And you can see in green, people are saying that yields are lower. I think that's quite consistent again. For Ethiopia, is kind of a mixed results there. And then the next point that we thought was important to capture was that communities are saying chemical input overuse and tree removal are the biggest threats to soils. I think this would resonate with a lot of people here. We have, like in the bars, we find what is the biggest threat to soils in your area. People are saying in the dark blue that removal of trees, and in this the light blue, the sky blue here is overuse of or abusive use of chemicals. For them are the biggest threats to soils. This one was also very interesting to learn that monocropping is still widely practiced in countries after intercropping, and crop livestock integration and agroforestry surprisingly are least practiced. You can see that here. When we did ask, what is a main farming method in your community? Many people were talking about the one in yellow, which was the main one, was that growing different crop together in the same area is a crop association. And then growing one crop on the whole farm, we have it in green. And we can see also with integration of crop and livestock, as well as agroforestry practices are coming behind. So to wrap up with the last theme, which was that on climate-related migrations, or simply climate mobilities, we did conduct this just recently this year, and what communities are saying is that climate-induced migration is widespread and mostly between rural communities. We can see that here. Are people living or coming to your area because of floods, droughts, soil degradation, wildfires, or other climate problems? That's what we asked. And this is what they said. Many said yes, many people are coming to our area in blue. And some said yes, many people are leaving our area because of climate-related problems. And we asked here, where are people going to because of these climate issues? And this is a response. Most of them, like in the brown color here, said they are moving to other rural areas. So it was kind of a rural community movements that we find here. But we also found that most people are going to towns and cities. This one in orange. So a few other key findings on this topic on climate mobilities is that drought, water scarcity, flood, and the soil and pasture degradation are the major causes of climate-related migrations. This is what communities were saying, and you can see that in this graph here, drought in yellow, in the blue, in light blue here, and then we also find floods in brown, and the soil or pasture degradation in green here. These are the causes of climate-related migrations. And just to wrap up with the presentation here, pressure on land, water and resources, and conflict between individuals, groups, and communities are among the biggest effects of people moving due to climate change. And we have a lot of policy suggestions that we have been discussing with stakeholders, especially our partners on the government side on these results. But I will just capture a few here, maybe just 3 or 4 of them that, adaptation policies, plans, and budgets should really think about increasing the focus on droughts and floods, but also on biodiversity loss, new pest diseases, and the weed prevalence that we are hearing about. Also about really integrating gender-based analysis in any adaptation efforts, because we are seeing significant issues around gender-based violence, and it should actually take into consideration gender-based awareness, even counseling and mechanism to redress abuses of victims of climate-related gender-based violence. So priority should be given to soil health and soil fertility. I think this is very crucial. Sustainable development cannot be achieved in sub-Saharan Africa without addressing this problem of soil health. And then finally, climate mobility is on the rise. I think this is very evident. There is a growing recognition of the importance of mobility for adaptation. I think we have to come to terms with this fact, and that there is a need for a stronger policy framework for climate-related mobilities, including local mechanisms for dialogue and resource management. I think that is it, and I want to thank you all for listening. I will turn it back to John to continue. Thank you, John.
Thank you so much, Charles, for that informative and insightful presentation. I hope everyone now has a better sense of nature-based solutions, the on-air dialogues, their potential, and how they inform our work here at Farm Radio. At this point, I'd like to introduce and welcome our esteemed group of panelists who we are so lucky to have with us for today's conversation. Joining us from Uganda, we have Joseph Lule. Joseph is an economist and is currently working as a principal policy analyst at the Ministry of Water and Environment, where he is supporting efforts to address the impacts of climate change and mobilizing green financing. Welcome, Joseph. Next up, joining us from Burkina Faso, we have Etienne Traore. Etienne is the director of the Department for the Coordination of International Conventions at the Permanent Secretariat of the National Council for Sustainable Development, the focal point for climate change in Burkina Faso, assigned to the Office of the Ministry of Environment, Water, and Sanitation. He's held numerous positions related to climate change and sustainable development, including coordinating national climate policy and mobilization of climate fund resources. Bienvenue, Etienne. From Canada, we have Carol Thiessen. Carol is the Policy and Communications Lead for the Nature Plus program at Canadian Food Grains Bank. She has more than 15 years experience working in international development and policy and advocacy roles, specializing in climate change and food systems policy. Welcome, Carol. And finally, last but certainly not least, we have my colleague Rosamond Ohene. Rosamond is Farm Radio International's country representative in Ghana. She has over 12 years of experience managing and delivering impact and donor-funded projects with expertise in sustainable agriculture, gender, development communication, monitoring, and evaluation. She has a particular strength in agro-centered radio content and engaging small and medium-scale farmers. Welcome, Rosamond. As I mentioned, we're so lucky to have such a dynamic group here. So let's jump into the conversation. I'd like to begin with a question for all of our panelists. We've heard a lot about what local communities have said when it comes to climate change, but I want to start off by asking each of our panelists about the importance of that. Rosamond, I'll put the question to you first. Why is it important to have the perspectives of local communities when it comes to building adaptation policies?
Thank you very much, John. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone. Working on the ground and also implementing this particular project, the nature-based solution projects in Ghana, and interacting with local communities and also facilitating dialogues with stakeholders and also policymakers. One of the things that I've come to realize is that bringing the perspective of local communities actually ensures that policy meets the real needs of the people for whom these policies are done for or are made for. It actually helps them create communities input to ensure that real challenges faced by people are actually imputed into these policies. This makes the policy a listening policy that helps to ensure that community needs and adaptation practices are embedded in. It also helps build ownership and acceptance of the policy. When local communities feel that their perspective are actually embedded into policies or even heard during policy documentation and drafting, once the policy come out, they see the policy as something that is of theirs, and therefore they accept it and own them, and then ensure that whatever is in there is implemented to the latter. It also brings about equality and inclusion. Oftentimes, when you enter communities, if you do not do segregation by listening to the perspective of men, women, and youth, and you just lump communities together, you are likely to miss out on some of the very important needs of some community members or some individuals within the community. Once this is done and you have all of them inputting into a policy, it strengthens the equality and inclusion aspect where men's voices are heard, women perspective, youth, and people with disability farmers and everyone. Oftentimes, people within the urban centers and people within certain geographic areas are likely to experience climate change and its impacts differently. And therefore, diversity by involving different communities' perspective actually helps to ensure that the policy comes out strengthening the equality and inclusion part. It also enhances accountability and trust. If community members openly are involved, it builds trust, and citizens actually own the policies and frameworks that government or decision makers at the end of the day come up with. Local knowledge, improvement, and solutions. Working on the ground, I've come to realize that community members do have their own indigenous way of adapting to climate change, and it's something that have been used over several years and decades, and they own these practices. Bringing them on board or listening to their perspective actually helps them, helps to strengthen the policy and also include indigenous knowledge that can be easily adaptable or adopted by these citizens. In summary, I would say that adaptation works best when people who leave the impact are actually involved and their voices heard and their solutions embedded into policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosamond, for those thoughtful points and perspectives. I agree. Trust is so crucial. And when people hear themselves reflected in their own words, it goes a long way to build that trust. Joseph and Etienne, from the perspective of the government, I'm wondering if you wanted to add or build on Rosamond's insights. And I'll start with you, Joseph. Why is it important to have the perspectives of local communities when policy making?
Yeah, thank you very much, John, and thank you for having me this evening. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to all of you. It's important to have local perspectives as we believe as a government. These are very essential in building effective adaptation policies, which ensure relevance. Why? Because communities will give us their own ideas, their own adaptation options, something chosen by them. So the solutions that we propose would be bottom up rather than top down. So we shall see that they're very relevant to them. Also, ownership in that case, in cases where we've done this, we see a lot of communities raising up to take on these initiatives. That also ties in directly to sustainability, because most often we do projects or programs or interventions for a particular period of time. When we pack up and leave, usually these interventions never stay. But where we've consulted and have communities engaged in the choices, we see some level of sustainability and initiatives live longer beyond the project lifestyle. And also another consideration in this is ownership and engagement of communities brings about a reduction in resource leakages, because communities are able to follow up their resources, they're able to monitor, they're able to demand what is theirs. So for us in Uganda, currently we're piloting around 2 projects or programs, I may say. They are locally led programs. One of them is called Local Climate Adaptive Living, LOCAL, and the other is the Least Development Climate Initiative for Effective Adaptation and Resilience, loosely called Life AR. So these programs have just started, but what we are trying to do is under, for example, Life AR, we are committing around 70% of climate financing to community-defined priorities. Why is this key for us? Is because we want to devolve climate financing to the least level. So we are piloting it in around 4 districts to see that communities come on board. This initiative helps in 1 or 2 ways. One, it helps to strengthen local government structures up to parish level, sub-county level, where we have tried to put in place parish development committees. We try to ensure that in these communities, parishes, sub-counties, we embed climate planning. We try to see that into the existing development frameworks, they talk about climate change and how it will be responded to. Also, we try to see that we empower them to lead from the front, to monitor, but also to adapt their own resilience strategies. Also, what we've seen in these cases as we begin to implement these programs, we see elevation of voices of women, the youth especially, and some marginalized groups. Why is this important for us? It ensures inclusion and socially responsive teams that we think once we leave, they will be more empowered to take personal responsibility for climate change. Because we know climate change affects all of us, but those of us in boardrooms, those of us in car SCs are less affected by climate change compared to the people who live it on a daily. So it's important to bring them on board. So in essence, in Uganda, in our experiences and the small pilots that we've done, we really say that there is a confirmation that when adaptation is locally led, it becomes more effective, more equitable, and enduring. Not just about delivering projects, it's about transforming systems and shifting power from the center to those closest to the climate risks and climate shocks. I thank you, John.
Thank you, Joseph, for highlighting the importance of that bottom-up approach and sharing the experience in Uganda. Etienne, I was wondering if you wanted to add anything to what you just heard from Joseph and Rosamond.
Ok, merci beaucoup.
Thanks a lot.
Avant de compléter,
Before I add
les
anything to what
documents
Rosemond and Joseph
permettez-moi
shared,
de remercier
I would like to
les organisateurs
thank
de
the
m'avoir
organizers for
impliqué dans
inviting
ce
me
webinaire.
for this
Il se
webinar.
trouve que je suis actuellement à
Sorry,
Dubaï, voilà, pour la COP
I am
30. Les sessions
outside.
préparatoires ont commencé
I
depuis
am
hier.
in a
Donc,
preparatory
je
meeting for the COP,
m'excuser peut-être s'il y a des
so you might be
interférences
hearing
avec
some
quelques bruits.
sound in the
D'accord. Pour
background.
revenir à la question, je pense
To
que
come back to your
l'interaction
questions,
avec les communautés locales
I think
pour
that
l'adaptation au
interacting
changement
with local
climatique
communities
est vraiment
for
essentiel
adaptation to
au Burkina
climate
Faso.
change, this is
Donc, comme vous le
essential in
savez,
Burkina Faso.
actuellement, les
As
impacts
you
du
know,
changement climatique
with the impact we can see,
s'amplifient de plus en plus
these
et les
impacts
moyens de
are
subsistance
increasing
des communautés
and
locales sont de
the
plus en plus menacés
livelihoods of the
en raison
communities
des
are
coûts de leur
threatened
faible capacité
due
d'adaptation,
to the
ce qui
limited
les rend
capacities they
peu
have.
vulnérables,
This
de
is
plus en plus
making
vulnérables.
them more
Et c'est
vulnerable to
pourquoi
this
nous
climate
pensons que
change
des
impact.
approches
This
communautaires
is why we
d'adaptation au
think that
climat sont
community
nécessaires pour réduire
approaches for
les
adaptations are
vulnérabilités.
really required
Et la
if we want
consultation de ces
to
communautés
go
locales
far. The
permet, entre
implication, the
autres,
involvement of these
l'identification
local
participative des
communities
solutions
will
adaptées aux
help
besoins.
us identify
Parce que les habitants
solutions
d'une
which are
communauté
adapted to
comprennent
their
leur état
needs
environnemental
because
et
they are
leur
the one
vulnérabilité. Donc,
experiencing
leur
this
implication
climate
rend donc
change
les options
impact.
d'adaptation
So in
plus
this regard,
pertinentes
based
et
on
applicables au
their
niveau local.
uh,
Et aussi, il y a
what they
l'inscription
will be
aussi de
saying, we
ces
will know
actions dans la
what kind
durabilité.
of solution
Parce que
we
les
need to
solutions
customize for
développées
them to be
et
able to
maintenues par les
adapt.
communautés locales sont
And
généralement plus
also,
durables et
when
culturellement
we have
équilibrées.
solutions presented,
Et
shared by
aussi, il y a
local communities, these are sustainable solutions. I think we lost.
l'utilisation des ressources
And
et des
also, as you
connaissances
said it,
locales
when we are using their
tend à
resources
réduire
and
les
their
conflits par
knowledges,
rapport à
this will help us
des approches
reduce the cost of the
descendantes.
initiative we would like to
Pour étayer
implement
mes
in the
propos, je
field.
vais donner quelques exemples de bonnes pratiques
So I
dans la
will just
consultation
like
des
to share
communautés locales
some
d'adaptation au Burkina
concrete
Faso.
examples.
Si je prends le cas, par exemple,
If I
du
take the
projet
example
Solutions fondé sur la
of the
messagerie,
project, the
ces dialogues, par
nature-based
exemple, à
solutions,
l'antenne ont permis de
uh,
recueillir
the
des
on-air
retours
dialogues
précieux
help us
sur des
to
pratiques
get
locales
precious
telles que
feedback on
l'agroforesterie,
local
la régénération naturelle
practices,
assistée
including
ou les dizaines
agroforestry,
de corrections
nature
de niveau.
uh,
Voilà, ces données aident
regeneration,
les institutions publiques,
and this helped
bien
our
sûr, à
country
concevoir au niveau
institutions
local
to see
et bien
which
sûr
kind of
l'implication de ces
solutions
communautés des options
we could
d'adaptation
provide to
réalistes
the
et
local
bien ancrées dans
communities.
les besoins de
And
ces
these
populations.
solutions were taking into
Autre
account the
exemple au
realities
Burkina
of
Faso, à travers des
local
consultations
communities.
communautaires locales,
Through the
on a
community
pu
consultations,
répertorier
we were able
55
also
bonnes
to
pratiques d'adaptation
identify
sur lesquelles
55
nous, les institutions
best
publiques, avec les
practices.
institutions de la recherche,
And
travaillent et
with
œuvrent
research
à
centers,
l'échelle
we
de
were able to
l'utilisation de ces
provide
bonnes
these
pratiques. Voilà,
solutions
voici
to
ce que
them.
je pouvais
So this is what I wanted to add to complement what Rosemont and Joseph said. I think that Etienne has
Yes.
some connection issues.
Okay, merci, Etienne. Hopefully we'll sort out the connection issues. I was able to hear most of that, so hopefully everyone else was. Thank you, Etienne, for sharing your perspective, those examples, and joining us during a busy time. Carol, I'll turn to you now. I know the Canadian Food Grains Bank makes community consultation and participation a priority. So I'll ask you, why are the voices of local communities so important in shaping policy?
All right, thank you, John, and thank you also for the opportunity to speak here today. I think my fellow panelists have already answered this question very well, and so I'll keep my comments very brief. I do think it is perplexing in some ways how straightforward this answer to the question is, and yet how difficult it can be to really put it into practice effectively. Adaptation is about the local. It's about local context. It's about local experiences. It's about local challenges. It's about the knowledge that local communities bring to their environments. So how can we possibly build an effective adaptation policy without bringing in those perspectives of those who are most affected? It's absolutely vital to the policy process, as my colleagues have already said. And when we speak of local communities, again, we can't think of local communities as a monolith. We need to bring in the perspectives of all community members who bring diverse lived experience and knowledge, such as women, people living with disabilities, youth, elders, and other marginalized groups. That is, very shortly, I think, how we build an effective adaptation policy. Thanks.
Thank you so much. As you say, it should be a straightforward process, but it's often met with many roadblocks along the way. So I appreciate everyone's perspective and for getting this important conversation started. I'm also pleased to see that some of you already left some comments and questions in the chat and the Q&A box. I encourage everyone to continue to do so. We really welcome your feedback, and we'll hopefully have some time to address some of your questions at the end. At this point, I'll turn back to Rosemont, though. As we've just heard, Farm Radio International uses the on-air dialogue results to try to bring community voices to policy arenas. What does Farm Radio International do with those results?
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, John. Once we are done with the on-air dialogues and we get these results, we don't say, yes, we are the owners of the results, because these results are supposed to help us to influence policy. What we do across all the 6 implementing countries is we work with what we call a national advisory panel. As Farm Radio, yes, we can say that we are expertise in development communication. However, we do not have the expertise when it comes to climate change, nature-based solutions, adaptation, and policies and all that. So we work with technical minds or technical people made up of researchers, also made up of governments, ministries, civil society organizations, and then some private sectors who are within the space that this project has been implemented. Once we get these results, what do we do with them? We share these results with our national policy national advisory panel. They help us in analyzing these results, getting them shaped up in a way that that we can present to policy makers. They guide us into, depending on the topics, like Charles mentioned, we've had 3 different on-air dialogues. So for each of them, we go through this process, and they help us with the various policymakers, ministries that we can bring on board to ensure that we share these policies with, for them to help us to know which policies, which plans, which adaptation frameworks that these policies can influence. So we move after analyzing, bringing up with recommendations, and then looking at what we can do and which policy areas or ministry we have to work with. We move into what we call the dialogue event. The dialogue is where we sit together with policymakers, together with some community members, to lay bare to them the policy, the results from these on-air dialogues. We present this to them. They help us shape them. They also give us perspective as to what we can do, how we can go about this, and which policy areas or adaptation or plan or strategy areas that we can present these policies to. Once this is done, we go ahead to bring some of the policymakers together, and they help us to come up with a policy brief. And then once we have these policy briefs, we share them with the respective ministries. This has actually helped us to be involved in some of the policy drafting and also reframing of some of the policies across the various countries that we implement these projects. We've contributed to some adaptation plans and policies and youth inclusion, where, because our work is more to do with nature-based solutions, where we introduce these results that we have obtained from the ground. Mind you, our results are coming from different and diverse groups. It is not a top-down approach, but rather a bottom-up approach, because most of the radio stations that we work with are rural radio stations. Some are peri-urban radio stations. So we're able to have the perspective of those at the grassroots level, those within the midsection, and also those at the top. And once we present this to the policymakers, they also bring in their input to ensure that whatever policy, whatever framework that are being implemented, these results find their way to reflect, to ensure that the policy is inclusive, so that community members can say that, yes, we spoke, and then government heard us, and they ensure that our voices are embedded in the framing of ongoing policies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosamond. Etienne and Joseph, you're coming to us directly with the government experience. So we're a bit tight on time. I'm keeping an eye on the clock here. But briefly, I was hoping you could share what it's like being on the other side of these dialogue events. And Etienne, I'll start with you. Etienne, you there?
Okay, merci beaucoup.
Thanks a lot.
En tant qu'acteur de
As a government representative, I think we lost Etienne.
un rôle très important.
Are you there, Etienne?
Ok,
Go ahead.
vous me recevez maintenant?
We'll try again. Go ahead, Etienne.
D'accord. Je disais que en
So
tant
I
qu'acteur
was
du
saying
gouvernement,
that as a member of a government, and based on our experience, we do have a role to play in this process. And this role
dans la dynamique
should inscribe in the dynamic we already have.
formula des améliorations.
And based on all we have been doing, we need to
Parlant de
improve
notre
things.
expérience vécue,
So from
nous
our
avons fait des
experience,
constats très, très intéressants.
we were able to see that there were great things during these dialogues.
Qui s'approprient les solutions fondées sur
And
la nature,
these
notamment pour
dialogues
diversifier les ressources.
could help the
Ici, nous
local
avons constaté
communities
la capacité d'innovation
to
locale,
take these
qui dans plusieurs
solutions
communes
which
les
will
paysans,
be coming from the
ont pu
policies
mettre en
later.
œuvre les diguettes avec les matériaux
And we do
disponibles,
have
tels que la
some
résilience
concrete
locale
examples.
contribuera à
For
l'eau.
example, with
Donc, c'est
stone
pourquoi
bonds,
nous pensons qu'il faut
and
donc travailler à
we
ce que ces
really
dialogues
need to make sure that these on-air dialogues have more impact. So as a government representative, we need to have a process, a mechanism which will help us institutionalize this dialogue into our ways of working, and we will make sure that the communities and the radio stations have the required resources so that they can support us in the field by bringing the perspectives of the communities so that we could together find solutions for these local needs. So for us to be able to implement our vision, we will rely on the support of FRI and other actors to make sure that these results from the on-air dialogues are taken into account in the policies and the programs we are developing at the government level. Thank you.
Merci, Etienne. That's the perspective from Burkina Faso. Joseph, how does this differ, if at all, from your experience in Uganda?
Yeah, thank you very much, John. I like the perspective from my colleague from Burkina Faso. But being on the government side of these dialogues and such events, publications is both humbling but also sometimes very instructive. I know a few engagements I've been into with farm radio. I see myself not just listening to data points, but also hearing lives or realities that realities, sometimes frustration, sometimes aspirations that sometimes never surface in the formal reports or in the formal consultations that we do through the top-down consultations as government. So for me, on-air dialogues bring voices that are usually never heard into the rooms where they must be heard. For example, I think in the first dialogue that we had with Farm Radio, the one on climate resilience, and we saw a lot of voices systematically gathering and being presented around reshaping priorities on trees, reforestation, but most importantly, I think there were gaps that we needed to address on trees on farm. Those contributions shaped our understanding, and as we revised the policy on tree planting in Uganda, there was a chapter that is dedicated trees on farms. I invite Farm Radio team in Uganda to interest themselves in that. The policy is still a draft, but you see that some of these voices that come through policy dialogues and on-air dialogues that your institution leads end up somewhere into policy formulation. So these help us identify gaps, not just in service delivery, but also help us to validate a few climate adaptation strategies and make them more inclusive and responsive. The other thing I would like to point out is when you look at the data and when Charles presented, what you see is what stands out is the power of scale and reach. You see that these online dialogues, on-air dialogues, the radio and the rest, they brought in tens of thousands of voices from remote areas, from places that sometimes we would not have heard about. I think they also brought in the traditional perspectives in terms of traditional knowledge to be brought on the table and we consider it. I'll give an example. How often most of us from different countries, we talk about early warning, but traditionally there are very many early warning. There's a lot of knowledge about early warning. And this knowledge has never found itself in the mainstream. So it's important that we continue doing these dialogues because they carry a big moral weight that is sometimes very hard to ignore. So from a government perspective, for us, these dialogues are not just informative, but they are transformative. And they challenge us to rethink how we design, finance, and also monitor adaptation. They also remind us about resilience beginning with listening, but not just dictating what the people want. Thank you, John.
Thank you so much, Joseph. It's so encouraging to hear the progress and how these practices bridge knowledge gaps and actually lead to concrete action. Rosemond, I'll come back to you quickly. You've witnessed firsthand the value of community consultation and participation. Why is it important for individuals to have a seat at the table when it comes to this decision making?
All right. So thank you again. Let me start from the lighter side. Normally when we meet with communities and we interact with them and we tell them, we are recording your voices. We want to include it as part of our work that we do. They're like, oh yes, we are happy to do that, because more often than not, they hardly get their voices and their opinions actually heard and also incorporated into some relevant adaptation and policies and all that. One of the major things that help, or like when these people are involved in, or when they are seated at a table in terms of adaptation practices, policies and all that, it actually helps them to boost their confidence. They know that, oh, okay, it means that once my voice goes, it will be heard. And mostly when we use our radio programs and they listen to their voices, they go like, oh, wow, that was me talking. And that actually helped them to own whatever information and also whatever thing that comes out of that particular information. It helps them, it helps also in better decision making, because the perspective of everyone at the table is heard, instead of a decision being taken and also thrown at them for them to just go ahead and take it, whether they like it or not. This also helps them to encourage responsibility. It encourages their responsibility levels, and also ownership of whatever decision that is taken. Working across different communities and also interacting with them, I've had the opportunity to meet with gatekeepers. I've also had the opportunity to meet with youth. I've had the opportunity to meet with men and women separately. And you realize that the opinions differ. What a gatekeeper sees as more relevant, a youth would also see a different thing as also more relevant. And therefore, the diversity that they bring sitting at the table to ensure that decisions are taken that is reflective of each individual within or each group or each sect of gender within the community, it's very important. So I would say that when individuals have a seat, decisions are more fair, because everybody contribute to it. It becomes more informed, because it's not like a one-way approach, or it's not like a top-down approach, but rather a bottom-up approach. And also it becomes more sustainable, because they were part of the decision. Once that is taken, once a policy or a strategy or a plan is brought to them, they actually own them, and they ensure that whatever is implemented becomes more sustainable for the good of their own livelihoods. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosemond, for providing a window into these dialogues and what it actually feels like to sit around the table. I want to bring Carolyn now to give us a different perspective here. The Canadian Food Grains Bank has been involved in policy work for a long time. How have you been approaching community involvement in climate change policy processes? And how does your work relate to what you've heard so far?
Thanks, John. Let me start just with a little background, I guess, on how Food Grains Bank itself is set up. We don't do direct implementation ourselves. We work through member organizations who in turn have partner organizations who in turn work with local communities on the ground in the countries where we're active. So we can be a little removed, I think, from those processes. Which can make it challenging to really integrate community voices into the policy work that we do, particularly for those of us who work in Canadian contexts speaking to Canadian government policies. But we do really try to do that well. And I would just give a little shout out to Farm Radio right now, because I think the on-air dialogues that you do are tremendously valuable to us to help to hear some of those perspectives. And wasn't asked to say that, but I think it's been really useful for us. We hear those voices also through the opportunities we have to travel to local communities, to visit projects, and to have formal and informal conversations with farmers. We have made a number of films featuring farmers talking about their experiences that we use in Canada to really highlight those local experiences to policymakers here. We have invited partner staff to come to the UN climate change conferences on a number of occasions to speak at side events on our behalf and representing the voices of communities where they work. So those are a couple of ways that we do that more from a Canadian perspective. A second point I would make is that increasingly we are embedding and ensuring that policy objectives are in our agriculture and livelihood programs that we're supporting, including the program that I'm part of, Nature Plus, which is part of the Partnering for Climate grant that Charles mentioned earlier, funded through the Canadian government. It's really then about ensuring that community members themselves can participate in policy processes in their countries and in their communities. Our partner organizations support that work in a few ways. They do awareness raising of policies that impact local communities, sometimes even translating those policies into local languages so that communities really know and understand policies and also know the rights that they have. Our partners do a lot of training on advocacy and policy change. They do training on public speaking so that community members have more confidence. They set up forums for community members to speak up and state their needs. And they're facilitating their engagement with policymakers, with local governments, and even national governments at times. And I can give you a couple of examples of that if that would be helpful, John.
Yeah, that would be lovely. Thanks for the shout out too. But if you had any examples you wanted to point to specifically, that's great.
Sure. Let me give you a couple of short examples from 2 countries where Nature Plus has been working at different levels. The first example is from Ethiopia. As some of you may know, Ethiopia hosted the second Africa Climate Summit just in July, and Canadian Food Grains Bank was there, as well as a number of our partner organizations who are active in Ethiopia. And we hosted a side event highlighting our experience in nature-based solutions. And our partner organization, FH Ethiopia, who works together with Mennonite Central Committee, invited a young female farmer to be the keynote speaker for our side event. And I think that was a super effective way to bring her experience into a very large policy forum. And I think she spoke to an audience that was Pan-African, including the Canadian High Commission. And her telling of her story and of her experience of climate change and effective adaptation really added, I think, to the conference and to framing the policy conversation in the real lived experience of farmers. A second example from Kenya includes wildlife intrusion into farmers' fields. One of our partner organizations in Kenya, their project site happens to sit right next door to a national park. And as climate change has impacted rainfall patterns and other conditions, elephants and other wild animals have been increasingly leaving that national park and looking for food elsewhere. And that has resulted in huge destruction in local communities, elephants trampling and destroying fields, destroying infrastructure, even loss of life. So obviously this is hugely distressing and problematic to those communities. And so our partner organization, UDO, Utoni Development Organization, with our program support, organized a stakeholder dialogue a few weeks ago, I think, with community members and with local and national policymakers to really help to raise their concerns and to find a solution. And so community members showed up in force. I hear they were very passionate and well articulate in talking about their needs and their experiences. And it seemed that they were heard. At the end, community members and government officials made a commitment to improve their community engagement and participation in oversight committees, and they agreed to work together better to try to find a solution. So we're hopeful that there will be positive steps moving forward, and of course, the community will hold them accountable. So those are a couple of quick examples from our experience.
Thank you so much, Carol. It's really helpful to have those concrete examples. And I'll ask the same of Etienne and Joseph. I'd like to give you both an opportunity to respond. I know you already provided some specifics earlier, but can you also give us maybe one concrete example of how the on-air dialogues have influenced policy in your country? Joseph, I'll start with you in Uganda.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. I'll not give the one of tree planting. I'll give the one in the last, I think, policy dialogue, policy brief that was made on soil health. For us, it was a very good timing because by then we're discussing and talking about chemicals, handling of agrochemicals. So the policy dialogue and the on-air dialogue results came out timely. Why? Because they help us to inform our input, both as a ministry's position. I work with the Ministry of Water and Environment, and our major concern then was the overuse of chemicals, agrochemicals that find their ways into the water channels. That gives a big threat, both water users and the animals and the whole ecosystem. But largely, it informed our submissions at the Ministry of Agriculture that had put in place a committee to look into the use of agro-related chemicals. So this policy brief helped us to strengthen our position on the use of chemicals in the agriculture sector. And indeed, we are currently using the position paper and the policy paper to guide our input further and submissions to the agrochemicals committee. So I thank you, and over to you, John.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Again, it's so useful to hear those specific examples. I'll ask the same of you, Etienne. You have about a minute. Unfortunately, we're a bit tight for time, but can you share a specific example of how the on-air dialogues have influenced policy in Burkina Faso?
Ok, merci beaucoup.
Thanks a lot. I hope this time my connection will be good and I am looking well on my camera. Let's share a few examples regarding the impact of on-air dialogues on the policy work in Burkina Faso. I will take an area from Burkina Faso. This area is considered as a place where food is coming from for all parts of Burkina Faso. So in this regard, the communities, the farmers asked us for more resources, more equipment for them to be able to improve their way of farming so that they can get more crops. In this regard, we were able to take into account their interaction, and we are trying to see how we can make sure they are receiving this support from the government. Okay, I think the other example I could share is that with hearing of the on-air dialogues programs on the dams, these programs were aired by 2 radio stations in the area of Moon. These programs had a significant impact at the community and institutional level. At the community level, these were framework where people were able to build their capacities. People were able to attend and they had the resources for them to be able to build dams. When we go to the institutional level, at the ministry level, mainly for the Ministry of Agriculture, we have started an initiative at the livestock level and the farming level to see how we can make sure these stakeholders agree so that they can use all together the water they have in the dams. So in this regard, in the coming months, we are going to build dams with the support of the communities. So we want these communities to monitor how these water resources are used, and later they will let us know how efficient their involvement in this process is. Thank you.
Merci, Etienne. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for your wonderful examples. To wrap up, I want to ask you all a question about how our audience can collaborate and effectively work with policy in the future. Many people in the room, in the chat, are curious about this as well. As I mentioned, we're a bit tight for time, so you'll each have about a minute for your answer. And Carol, I'll start with you. Given the Canadian Food Grain Bank's extensive experience in this, what should we as civil society organizations be thinking about when we incorporate policy into future projects?
Thanks, John. Yes. First of all, just that it is really important to integrate policy into projects. And I would give 5 things, quick things to think about. Really basic, ensure policy actions and goals are in the monitoring and evaluation framework. If we know we have to report on policy work, then we're much more likely to prioritize it and to take action on it. Similarly, make sure there's a staff person on the ground working on policy and advocacy. Again, if it's at the tiny, tip-top corner of somebody's desk, it's probably not going to happen very well. Make sure that there is capacity sharing, that implementing organizations have the skills that they need to support policy work. Often in our case, our partners are really strong on agricultural programming and other areas, but maybe less strong on doing advocacy. So make sure that they have the knowledge that they need. 4th, be adaptable. Policy issues will arise as projects are being implemented, and that's part of how we respect the voices of our community members. For example, there wasn't any plan to hold a wildlife stakeholder dialogue in that one partner area until it became a real issue as the project was being implemented. And so we adapted and added that to the program. So where possible, that's really important. And finally, I would say we need to acknowledge and understand that policy work takes time, and meaningful change often doesn't happen overnight. So be realistic about what can happen in short project cycles. And then that's about really empowering communities to carry on with their advocacy efforts long after we have left those communities. So think and plan for longer horizons. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carol. And I appreciate the 5-step plan. I hope someone was writing that down. And a reminder, this presentation webinar will be on YouTube, so we can review all these excellent points. Etienne, from your side of the table, how should civil society organizations be organizing themselves to work with governments on policy like this? And again, unfortunately, you only got about a minute, so the floor is yours.
Oui, ici là, vous m'entendez? Ok. Merci à notre niveau, notre structure qui est le secrétariat permanent.
Our department, what we are doing is to see how we can work with all the stakeholders engaged in the climate change work, so that this process is very collaborative. For the civil society organizations, we think that together they could provide us with data from the field, as you were able to collect from ULISA. This is an interactive platform from FRI. And we also think that this civil society organization should attend the participatory framework so that in their turn, they can provide information to the communities. In this regard, we are currently having a platform where they are invited so that they can provide their input for their members. The civil society organizations are also playing a key role in advocacy because they are providing proofs for the policies we want to develop. This is what I can add for this implication of civil society organizations. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much, Etienne. And Joseph, similarly, how can organizations like Farm Radio and the Canadian Food Grains Bank collaborate with people like yourself?
Yeah, thank you very much, John. I'll be very quick. I think I'll mention a few areas in how we can collaborate. We may look at one co-designing evidence pathways, looking at translating community voices into actionable policy inputs. I saw great recommendations from Chelsea's presentation. I think from dialogues like those and from consultations done on the grassroots level, these are a lot of rich data that has been generated. So synthesizing it into briefs, dashboards, or policy memos, or it could be, these tools become very usable for us in the ministries as we do planning. The other way I think we could partner is looking at amplifying voices in formal spaces. We still count on you. We can partner with you. We can't reach all the corners of the various countries and communities, but we count on you to go out there, bring these voices, community perspectives.
Oh,
You may
I think,
become community representative. Can you get me now?
yes, we're back.
Great. I was saying you could support communities to participate in national dialogues. For example, we are reviewing the NDC now. We are doing finance consultations, climate finance consultations. Sometimes we have program working groups. Some of these community leaders, community participants may not be able to travel to the center to participate in these meetings. That's one way of, say, FHR and the others may come on board to support them and help to amplify their voices in our formal spaces. We may look at
Thank you.
strengthening local monitoring systems as well, majorly training and empowering them to be more visible in decision making, but also to help and follow up what is being implemented in their localities. The other one is, I think, facilitating multi-stakeholder platforms. There would be structured meetings on policy roundtables. There would be things around problem solving, trust. They help us to do problem solving, but also build trust. Can be breakfast meetings around topical areas you may have carried out and topical issues you may have had on the online dialogues, and we see how we can partner. Finally, maybe around co-designing projects and implementation interventions that we can co-design, and we mobilize resources to actually respond to climate change on the ground. I thank you, and over to you, John.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And finally, Rosamond, I'll let you have the last word. I know we're already technically at the end of the webinar here, but maybe you could just wrap up for us. What's the main takeaway for our audience on how to ensure community experiences inform policy processes on climate change?
All right.
And say all that
Okay.
in 30 seconds.
Okay, so I would say that communities actually have lived experiences that, when incorporated into policies, can help to ensure that they own them, they take accountability of it. This also establishes trust. By documenting local challenges and also solutions through stories, radio, and then community meetings. This will help them do that. Yeah, yes, indeed. We are looking out for them, and we have them at heart to ensure that their perspectives and their perspectives and also things that they do really matters to policymakers, civil society organizations, and government. And so on this note, I would say that communities have power to shape conversations. They also have power to shape policies and for them to become more realistic and also more fair and more effective and inclusive. Thank you.
I don't know how you did that in 30 seconds. Thank you so much for those thoughts, and I think that's a good place to end it. I want to thank everyone for their contributions, to thank all our speakers and presenters today. I know we're a bit over time, but we've had such an insightful conversation. It's really inspiring to hear how impactful the on-air dialogues can be in shaping policy, and again, bringing local community knowledge to the forefront of the decision-making process. I'd also like to thank our translator, Sarah Karambiri, and those who helped us behind the scenes, Tara Sprickerhoff, Sheila Utama-Ruka, Samuel Kojo Antobam, Blair Amiot, and Sarim Gabre. If you have any questions, again, please don't hesitate to reach out to us by email at info@farmradio.org. Or if you'd like to see how to include on-air dialogues in your own projects, please don't hesitate to contact us at partnerships@farmradio.org. Again, thank you all for joining tonight's or this morning's conversation, depending on where you're joining us. And please take care. Thank you so much. Bye for now.